Hi guys. Right, we're going to get started now with Rory Hood's talk on his experiences of the industry and what he's learned whilst he's been working at MWR, who are sponsoring our after party. So, over to Rory.
We call it MWR Bar for a reason. So this talk is primarily focused for students. I really want to give you a rough idea of what the industry is actually like. So before I started, I had some preconceptions of what I thought it would be like. And I just kind of want to share with you some of the things that I found out along the way. So, who am I? My name is Rory Hood. I'm an alumni graduate of the University of Edinburgh Dundee from its ethical hacking course. I was involved in security at the very start. This is my absolutely favourite conference in the UK, and I'm really glad to see that the students are really pushing it, and it's still student-led, because that's fantastic and really unique compared to all other conferences in the country. Primarily, I'm a mobile application tester, so I also want to give you a kind of idea of what's involved in that, because it might be an avenue you'd be looking to get into further down the line. So, I'm going to talk about my perspective change, the first 6 months of uni and what they're really like. I want to give you some advice on how you get a job, and some of the things you can do to help your CV. I want to tell you what sort of jobs are like, the kind of difference between short-term projects to long-term projects, and the sort of bugs that you tend to find on each. And of course, I want to tell you a little bit about mobile security. So, how do you get onto the ladder? When we interview new people, one of the primary things we look for is that they have a high degree of technical knowledge. But that requires, first of all, that you manage to get in the door so that you actually have an interview. The problem is we get a lot of CVs, and I imagine a lot of other companies get a lot of CVs as well. And the question is, how do you get past HR, and how do you impress people with your CV? So, having good grades to begin with is a really good way to do it. It's kind of gone the way where whatever you do after university, you really need at least a 1-1 or a 2-1. Otherwise, you'll find it hard to get past HR. Because basically, it's a way of them cutting down the bundle that they've got to shift through. So I really suggest to try really hard in your exams and your studies in order to ascertain that. But there are exceptions for people who are extremely good technically, but perhaps aren't so great in an academic context. If you can publish any advisories of any bugs that you find, that will go a long way to show that you have the technical expertise that we require. Additionally, any internships you can get and any previous experience you'll find is a really big help. And you'll find once you have one piece of experience, it becomes easier to get more. I got my first internship when my boss at the time came up to university to speak. And at the end, I just watched everybody walk out, and I couldn't believe it. So I went over to him and I was like, you know, I'm interested in getting into the industry. Do you fancy coming for a pint and having a chat about it? So we went for a pint in the student union, and he paid for it, of course. Which is actually the best way to do it. And at the end of it, I asked him, you know, do you do any internships? And he said, well, no, but I'll see what we can do. So that's how I ended up working in KPMG's pen test team for the summer. And by extension, that's how I got my second internship. So we were at DC 4420, which is the London chapter of DEF CON, and they were running a bit late. So they went around the circle and had everybody stand up, 30 seconds, who you are and what you do. So I stood up and I was like, I'm an ethical hacking student, I'm currently a pen test intern, and I run Aberdeen's Ethical Hacking Society. Within 30 seconds, I had a guy come over to me, put his card on my table, and said, give me a call when you stop being an accountant. So you'll find that once you have one piece of experience, and that people in the industry know about it, they're far more likely to take notice of you and to try and employ you. Additionally, any certificates that you can get while at uni will be a real bonus. I wouldn't expect many of you to go for your CRT, which is Czech Registered Tester, before you finish university. But any qualifications like CEH that you can get will be a real bonus. Now, I'm not saying CEH is a particularly good qualification. I'm not saying it's particularly bad either. but it does show that you've got an interest and that you have some degree of technical knowledge, which again, you can build on once you get into the industry. And for me, the most important thing you can do is to have a role in an active membership in Abertay's Ethical Hacking Society. Now, I know there's some other students here that are from different universities, and I think some of them now have hacking societies. So if you can get involved in those, that's definitely a way to show that you're interested and that you're committed if you're turning up every single week. And ideally, if you can get a role within the committee of it, then it shows that you not only have the desire to get into the industry, but that you also have other transferable skills like leadership. And these are things that really play a big part. So I would describe the industry, and it probably goes far to describe life as a ladder. But it's not just a single ladder, there's different ways and different ladders you can take. In the industry, you'll find it's rare that one person is technically amazing at every different area. 90% of the industry seems to be web application based. So a lot of people tend to go down that route. Excuse me. It seems to be that infrastructure about 20 years ago was the hot thing to do. So you'll find people that are in their 30s to 40s now, they're still pen testing, are really amazing infrastructure testers. And that's what they tend to stick to because that's what they know. But there's tons of different areas that you can get involved in. If you're interested in the payment card industry, you've got PCI compliance, which is something I think most pen test companies in the UK do. Mobile application testing, that's what I'm currently involved in. That's a really new and up-and-coming area. And I mean, we're just beginning to see Windows Phone stuff come in just now. So it's a really good thing to have on your CV. And a lot of people, I reckon, in the next couple of years are really going to be looking for mobile testers as mobiles begin to replace the functionality that we generally rely on web applications for. So if you're looking for a niche area that will help you get a job, I do recommend that one as something you should look at. But there's other different kind of areas. You could go into training where you train developers in secure development practices. Because you'll find a lot of developers went through university doing programming courses, and they're really good at object-oriented design concepts, but they don't generally have the security background that we have that makes us good testers. So training those sort of developers is definitely a big up-and-coming thing as well. If you're interested in anything forensics based, there's incident response and dealing with APT, advanced persistent threats. That's something I'm not particularly interested in. To me, it's like searching for a needle in a haystack, but the people that I've seen do it are excellent at it. And I'd say it's quite a skilled area to go into if you're interested in that sort of thing. If you're feeling really advantageous, you could be a sysadmin, but if you go into the sort of pen test industry, being a sysadmin in the pen test industry is like the worst thing you could ever do, because everybody you work with is criticizing you and telling you you're doing it wrong. So that's not something I would recommend. But then if you're interested in research, there's a lot of research that goes on. A lot of companies will do research to promote themselves, but then they'll also do client research, and there's different sort of avenues you can take depending on that. And obviously that depends on the work that you get in and what sort of things you're researching. But it's generally really new, innovative, and interesting things. So in my last 6 months of industry, I would say that I had certain preconceptions of the industry. And I assume most of you who are not currently in it will as well. So I just want to give you kind of a brief overview of the sort of things I expected, and then I want to tell you if I was correct or if I was wrong. So I thought the industry was primarily web application testing. I read a statistic not so long ago that said 90% of the industry was web application testing, and indeed a lot of the testing is web application based. So I don't know if 90% is the correct figure, but at least 50% I would say is definitely web application based testing, which means if you are a web application tester, there is currently a lot of jobs for you. I think as we move to mobile slightly more, that we'll see slightly less web application testing, and then mobile will take over from it, just due to the nature of the way we use mobiles just now. I had an opinion which was the SQL injection was really common, and it is really common. And I thought we'd just SQL all the things, we'd dump the databases, we'll go have a coffee. I thought that was how it would work. And I was kind of wrong. And And a lot of the websites out on the internet, definitely vulnerable to SQL injection. But the type of web applications we test commercially are generally better built, better designed, and most of the time the developers have some concept of what they're doing, which is what you want. We want to see developers who are actively making good decisions and trying to prevent attacks on their websites. So while SQL injection is there, it's generally harder to do, so you might come up against blind SQL injection in a really niche part of the website that the developers have overlooked. So it's definitely there, but you've got to look harder for it. I assume since pen testing is a consultancy, unless you work within an organization, that we wear suits all the time. Now, a preconception of that came from my internships, where I wore suits. So that was a fair preconception. But I've noticed that where I work now, especially, which is MWR, we have a very informal dress code, especially within the office. And a lot of the other pen test consultancies have the same kind of ethos, where if you're not on client site, you're not dealing directly with the clients, it doesn't really matter what you wear. But that being said, when we go on site, especially for the first time or the start of a new project, then we will always wear a suit. And the reason for that is that allows us to gauge the level of dress that the client uses, and we can tailor effectively what we wear to them, and that keeps them comfortable. And if we dress down slightly, that keeps our consultants more comfortable. And it's really about keeping the client happy, and then keeping the consultants as happy as you can within that. I assume that since we do a lot of work for a lot of different clients, we'd spend a lot of time traveling. I hadn't really taken account the fact that we do a lot of remote work. So while, depending on your job, you might get sent on site a lot of the time. It's surprising how often you can just work from the office. In fact, I see people that haven't been on site for about 3 months, and that's quite good. But being on a client site has a different atmosphere and ethos to it. It is more professional. And it's a really good kind of clash, because sometimes you want to wear a suit, you want to feel professional in the industry you work in. But the other times you just want to sit in the office, you want to be comfy, and you want to hack some shit. In terms of scoping, I had really considered we'd get told what's to be tested, we'd write a scope, we'd send it to the client, and they would sign it. I didn't really consider that there would be a lot of client interaction. So when we do a scope, we will sit down, generally in a conference call for client. We'll discuss what they think their problems are. We'll discuss what we think their problems are. And we'll come to a compromise where we try and satisfy what they want while giving them the best value for money. Because you'll find that the clients don't often know what they want. Because some clients who are very good, who know exactly what they want, they know exactly what they need tested, and they have a rough idea how long it should be done for, because they do it all the time. Then you have other clients who don't really have that developed practice, where they need to tick a box for compliance. And it's basically trying to give them the best value for money in terms of security. I was that person in university that thought iPhones sucked. I'm sure there's quite a few in here that probably think that. But interestingly enough, I don't own an Apple product at all, but I now love the iPhone. In terms of mobile application testing, it is my favorite device to test on. So as much as there's probably a lot of Apple haters in the room, give it a chance. It's actually quite good, apart from OS X, worst operating system ever. So being a pen tester is actually quite awesome. You basically sit down and you hack all the things. You generally have to be careful because you will have a scope and you can't really stray out your scope. But in general, you'll find that the scoping is wide enough to allow you to do what you want and what you need to in order to test the application. For some reason, Nerf guns have become a massive thing in pen testing. Now, as far as I'm aware, we did it first and everybody copied us. I'm sure other people will disagree with that. But I have heard an interesting story recently where one pen test company got a whole bunch of Nerf guns and then got them taken off them because somebody got shot in the eye. I don't know how true that is. But companies run a lot of internal events. We run a really awesome Capture the Flag event called HackFu. So this year it was in a a radar station. I don't think it's in use anymore, but the year before that, it was in an XRAF base. And we basically spend a long weekend in these random places, and we just hack things. Like, there's challenges all set out, and we basically just hack things and drink. That's absolutely fantastic. It is the classic hacker concept that they're drunk and they hack stuff. And everybody's really young. This is one of the things that I was really surprised at. This industry is full of people in their 20s. Like, they all look like teenagers, but they're all highly skilled technically. So it seems almost like once you hit, your mid-30s, maybe late 40s at the most, you don't pen test anymore after that, you move into management, which is really weird, because in a lot of industries you might not hit management till you're in your late 40s and 50s. And by extent, the money involved in pen testing is ridiculous. It's a niche market, and so there's a lot of money in it. So it is there are definitely financial rewards to it, but that shouldn't be all you consider. I mean, it's nice to have money, but having an environment where you can hack things, and that's cool, and all your friends are around. Like, I work with 3 people that I was at university with, and it's so great to see them. Just every day, just hacking stuff. Like, they find something cool, and you go over, and you're like, "What does this do?" And then you're like, "Oh my god, it's amazing!" And it's just a really great environment. In terms of the kind of computing industry, I mean, I haven't been in the rest of it, but I've seen it. And it just seems like one of the best areas you can go into, and I highly recommend it. But even friends that you went to university with that aren't in the company that you're at, you still see them all the time. Conferences run throughout the year, just like this one. Not as good as this one, but there are other ones. And you'll find that you see people like 1,000 miles away from where you studied, and you're just like, "Oh, how are you doing? How are you getting on? What sort of things are you up to?" So all the people that move into the industry, you never really lose contact with them. They're all still there. And that's a really reassuring thing about this industry. All your friends you won't really lose contact with. One of our bosses, he spends 6 months of the year organizing HackFu, which makes it so incredibly awesome. But he also recently built his own version of Jeopardy with hacker questions. And it's really good, those sort of events. Like we'll take a lunch out and we'll play Hacker Jeopardy, and then we'll go back and we'll hack some more stuff. And it's like such a really reassuring and great environment. And of course, if you're interested in research, a lot of companies now will offer you 15-20% research time by default. And if you're pushing something really awesome with your research, you just ask and they'll give you more time. And that's the kind of thing you want. You want the flexibility, but you don't have to be utilized 100%. So if you're interested in research, it is there to do. Now I've just described it as this like awesome thing, full of fun and games. And it is to a certain degree. But it is also professional. We do have to scope jobs. We do have to interact with the client. Sometimes the clients are really technical, and they'll get what you say, and that makes the conversation really easy. But sometimes you have clients that have a rough idea what they want, they know it needs tested, but they don't really know what that involves. So you have to basically help them along. You have to explain what everything is about. And in that way, you do have to be very professional. When we write a report, for example, if we used technical acronyms all the time, it would only be readable by a technical person. And generally, that might be okay, but you'll have one client, for example, that reads it and they go, "What the hell does this mean? This is no value to me." So you have to basically tailor your reports to a certain degree. And of course, I say we hack things all the time. We are goal-driven to a certain extent, where what we are looking for is bugs and issues that we can tell the client. Because at the end of the day, that's what they're paying for. They want to know where the security issues are so they can go fix them. Now, they might not always agree that it's an issue. They might not always go fix it. But we are there to highlight and help them identify bugs and the threats to their organization. So in that way, we really have to help them understand the impact of the bugs. And the interaction with clients, it's different between short-term projects you do and long-term projects you do. So in a short-term project, it'll probably last between 1 week and 2 weeks. You might be doing a web application. And you have a scoping call, which you might not do. Somebody else might have scoped the job for you. But you'll interact with the client if you need credentials. You might have an engagement consultant who's your go-between that does that for you. And generally you're looking for things like low-hanging fruit, the really obvious bugs, things that you can report on. Obvious syntactical bugs, like if you were testing an actual application, like written in C, for example, first thing I would do is basically run over it with a program that highlights syntactical like bugs. So really I would probably use something that's regex based. And I'd look for things like printf, string copy. That would be the first thing I would do. Because they're really big bugs, and that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. But you'll find if an application has been tested before, it's generally not so easy, because there's a lot less low-hanging fruit, because it's been found, and hopefully it's been fixed. So at that point, if you have 1 week, 2 weeks, it becomes a lot harder, because you need to squeeze more out of this application than you would be able to otherwise, because it's been tested before. And sometimes you won't find anything. Sometimes you might find very little. It just depends on the application. You've generally got to go for the more obscure bugs. The best kind of bugs, in my opinion, are the logic bugs. So syntactical bugs, they're easy to find. But logical bugs, you really have to understand how the application works and fits together. So you might find things like race conditions, which at the moment, not many people seem to pick up. And I think that's just because they're so context specific to how you use the application. So that's just kind of the way it seems to go. But here's the interesting comparison. So you might have a short-term project that's been tested tons of times before, which makes it harder to find bugs. So what if you've got a long-term project that's been tested a million times before? So all your easy syntactical bugs are gone, and you're looking for the really hard bugs. At this point, this is where you really get the chance to understand how the application works and fits together. And generally, if you work on a long-term project that basically is constantly running, there'll be new developer features, new code to check. Those are your kind of your key areas that you want to check, because it's new code, and developers assume if there's a bug in the code that it's been there since the start. But of course it's not, because they're constantly introducing new features, constantly reusing parts of the code that weren't designed to be used in that way. And that's where you find the really cool bugs. So functional testing is really great, but a lot of the time, especially with new features, you really need to look at the source to understand exactly what's going on. So I personally recommend, whenever you do a project, if you can, get the source code, because how you think something works, programmatically, it might work slightly different, and that's where you might find the introduction of really cool bugs. So I want to quickly tell you about mobile application testing. Originally, this had tons of stuff in it, and I had to cut it down for time, so it's basically just a selection of things that we tend to see. So contrary to common belief, testing mobile applications isn't just about testing mobile applications. As I said earlier, we tend to use mobile applications now in the same way that we traditionally used web applications. So basically that means that we have a mobile application on the front end and a web application and web application APIs on the back end. So you're basically 50-50 testing each. And when you test the mobile application, you're testing really for the vulnerabilities in the device itself, which requires you to have quite an understanding of how that device works. And of course, the transferable skills from web apps really help when you're testing the back-end infrastructure. And generally you use the same sort of tools, and you use Burp, you man the middle of the traffic to start screwing with requests. And that's where you get, again, the cool bugs when you start screwing with your logic. Because developers don't think generally, they don't treat it as a web application, they treat it as a mobile application, which is the danger. So, this is my opinion, and that iPhones are just the best phone. The standard average person doesn't want to be able to screw with their operating system on their phone. If they can change their background, they're happy. That's customizable, and you can do that on the iPhone. But the best thing about testing with the iPhone is when you're testing the back end, because that's really the critical infrastructure. When you test on the iPhone, it will always listen to the system proxy, which is really great. That means if you're not allowed to set up a third-party AP and proxy into a corporate network that way to talk to the back-end infrastructure, because not all companies are happy for you to do that. They want to know and control all the access points into their infrastructure. And that's fair enough. So it will allow you to do that really easy because every app will listen to the system proxy. But one of the problems I found in Android, especially if you're running on an unrooted device, sorry, it is unrooted, it's jailbroken, this iPhone. You'll find that not all applications have to listen to the system proxy. And if an application has been coded for a really serious purpose, then generally they won't let you proxy it. So it becomes a little more iffy. If you have a root device, of course, you can set your host file and you can manually point your domains to where you want them to go. But testing on the iPhone is just much better. And the iPhone, in terms of security, I think, is a much better device. It's got features like ARC, which is the automatic reference counting. And that basically handles your memory allocation of objects on your behalf. And when we find automated things like that, managing memory instead of the developer, they're less likely to make a mistake because they have no control over it. But you also have things like the keychain, where you basically encrypt things against Apple's master key, and everything's like all good and secure. Whereas we don't really have that in Android. But you also have your memory protection mechanisms. And of course, Android has these now too. But it seems like Android is always constantly playing catch up to iOS. So for the average person, I do think the iPhone is better. Now, of course, I don't want an Apple product. I, of course, have an Android device. And for me, that's really great, because that allows me to customize it in ways that I want. At one point, I wrote a rootkit for it. It would be a lot harder to do that for iOS. So it's really this kind of balance between how much customization do you need, which in Android is a lot. Or if you don't need it at all, you've got the iPhone, which is basically super secure and locked down. And that's why it's now approved for government work. So, I said at the start, one of the best things you could do is publish advisories. And if you're looking to get into mobile application testing, it's really easy to download mobile applications and to start testing them. Now, if they've got a backend, you have to be really careful, because that's the same as SQL injecting into the backend of the system on a website. So what I would do is basically test the device as much as you can, without being connected to a network, to ensure that you're not connected to the backend infrastructure anyway. But it's a really good way to basically get things for your CV. So there's a really cool hack, which is basically called JavaScript bridges. I don't think that's technically the hack, that's actually a feature. But basically, that's my favorite word today, basically. If you have an application on Android that runs a WebView, WebView allows you to render HTML code. And by extension, if it's enabled, it also allows you to run JavaScript. Now, Android is really funky, is using Java, which has got some really funky cool stuff. And Java is a reflection-based language. And that means that you can dynamically look up methods and classes of objects. So what we can do, if we have an unencrypted connection, is we can basically inject into the WebView, and if there's a JavaScript bridge enabled, we can basically bridge from JavaScript running in the WebView to Java, and we can use that to effectively start executing code, and that gives us remote code execution. So that's basically just a snippet of code that shows that we can execute code. But it's a really dangerous thing, and we've seen this a lot recently with mobile ad networks. If you're interested in that, there's a release document, I think, on our MWR Labs website, and it's a really cool, cool bit of research. So I would definitely check it out. So storage works slightly different on both Android and iOS. On Android, you'll find a lot of developers are happy to write to the SD card. Now, of course, the problem with the SD card is it's globally readable and writable by everything. So that makes it inherently insecure. You'll find that a lot of the time databases are stored within the application directory. Of course, on Android, if you have a root phone, which is really easy to do, you can just pull that straight off. So again, we're storing data which could be sensitive in an unencrypted format. So if you're looking for things to check, I would definitely check for things like these. iOS has it a lot better, where it's got the keychain for encryption. Now, one of the problems is if it's not encrypted for iOS, is that people assume, because iOS is locked down, that you can't access the application directory. Now, generally that's true, but if you run it with the application in the simulator, for example, the simulator is effectively mounted as part of the OS X file system, and you can basically just browse to it and pull the database off. And again, as soon as you've got it, if it's unencrypted, you can basically access the data. And that's really a developer issue where they make assumptions about how the device works. And this is why 50% of mobile application testing is really understanding and knowing how the device works and the insecurities behind it. So currently, off-by-one errors are my absolute favorite. You can either get them syntactically in functions such as string copy, mem copy, and that might give you some form of arbitrary memory write. But we've seen some really cool logical off-by-one errors. So I want to take you basically through a scenario. So imagine you've got a Photoshop-like app. I don't know if Photoshop has an app, but if it did, I imagine it'd be subscription-based. So we imagine that costs you $4.99 a year. I think I put it up. So for every, they're going to have a feature that basically allows you to invite your friends by giving them their email address, and then the back end will go and email off to them. And for every friend you invite, you're going to get 1 free day of trial, okay? Because Photoshop obviously has a trial. Now, the reason you can only invite 7 people is because you're physically, and I say physically lightly because it's on a phone, you are restricted by the UI application on how many friends you can invite. So you can invite 7, which is 1 for every day of the week. So what kind of happens when you click invite all my friends? So if we assume you've invited 7 friends, it will send it to the back end, and so in this case we're going to assume it sends it in the form of a JSON array. So for sake of argument, we'll say the connection is unencrypted. Even if it wasn't, there's other ways you could go about doing this. You could put the application, start manipulating it that way. But for sake of argument, we are able to manipulate the connection or what is sent to the backend in some way. And when the backend gets this JSON array, this is the sort of thing it's going to do. The backend knows how many invites you're allowed to send, and it knows the number that you sent. Now, if we look when it iterates through the email addresses that you give it, because it's in a JSON array, it's basically going to check that the number of invites that you have left is less than the amount that you've sent. And then it will send off an invite. Now, there's an off-by-one bug in this, where the number of allowed invites is 7, which is fine, but of course the developer, which is me in this case, has forgot to take account of the fact that in computing we count from 0. So this, in effect, will allow us to send up to 8 invites. So while the front end of the application, which is the mobile part, attempts to restrict us, by manipulating the data that actually gets sent, we can manipulate how many invites actually get sent. And by extension, we can add 1 extra day to our free time. So, from the user's perspective, you really think, who cares? I can get 1 extra day. That's not really a lot to me. But if we assume that subscription is $4.99 a year, then if we do some funky maths, we can work out that 1 day of usage for that app equates to about 1.37 pence. Now, if we make a conservative estimate that we have 100,000 users, which isn't a lot, I mean Snapchat, as I've got up there, has 4.6 million, then we can calculate that the business is not making £1,137. Now that sounds like a small amount, but this is how companies justify security. In general, I mean, this is a very contrived example. Companies consider security a worthwhile investment if the amount that they spend on security is substantially below the value of the bugs we find. So if we value that one at £1,137, I think that's not a lot, but if you're finding tons of bugs that when you value them have high risk ratings, or even if you combine all the value of all the bugs together, and that's substantially above the amount that the company spends on security, that's considered good value and worthwhile investment. So that's basically why we have a job, because we find bugs that are really cool, but they can have a price associated with them. And that's basically why the industry exists. So that's basically it for me. I hope you go out to get stuff for your CV. I definitely advise you start looking for bugs in web applications and mobile applications, and you start releasing advisories. Excuse me. Even if it's not on a website that offers a bug bounty program like PayPal, any form of advisory shows that you have some form of technical skill and will really help you getting in the door when you go for a job. Definitely try and get an internship. It's one of the most valuable things you can do, and it definitely helped me get a job. And the most important bit is buy me drinks. In all seriousness though, you'll find if you offer to buy somebody in the industry a drink, chances are they'll offer to buy it for you. Because there's a lot of money in the industry, and people are happy to sit and chat with students who are really looking to get into it and really enthusiastic. And making contacts now is one of the most fundamental, brilliant things you can do to help you get into the industry. So I hope that's been enlightening to a certain degree. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've taken something away from my perspective. So is there any questions? Georgie?
There's a question about research in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, if, say I'm doing research, how would I pay for it? What would the amount to be calculated?
How much would you get paid for research?
By research.
Wait, oh, so if you research 100%? In a pen test company, I don't think you would get 100% research unless you're really freaking late. Like, I know one guy who's just ridiculous, and I think he's got a really low utilization. So the thing is, if you're doing really awesome research, which by extent brings money into the company because it raises your profile, then they'll pay you a lot of money generally. The problem is, if they send you onto a client site, you will be charged at however much a day. It might work out that they're actually losing money by sending you on site. So I can't really say, if I'm honest. It's all negotiable depending on the person. But if you're producing really good research, it's all up for grabs. I hope that helps. Is there any other questions? Dave? So we have a 12-week probation period. It's basically time for you to decide you like the company to decide they like you. And I got a lot of training in that. So we do a lot of shadowing work. I did a lot of web applications at that point. I did a couple of mobile things. And it's basically time for you to find your feet, find what you want to do. And so you basically have free reign. You're not billable at all in that. But we basically have a lot of internal classes. I hadn't really done a lot of regex up until 3 months ago. One of our guys did a regex class, and I need regex in like an afternoon. So there's a lot of training going on. If you're on site a lot, you do tend to miss out on it. That's just unfortunate in the way it goes. But they tend to rerun stuff every so often. And if you go to somebody and say, oh, I would have really liked to have been at that, but I couldn't. Any chance you can redo it? And chances are you'll find, especially with us, people are happy to sit down and explain things to you. And it's really weird, because while people are technically excellent, they're also very good teachers. So, I mean, you never stop learning. until you go, you're 35 and you go into mentoring, and then you do that stuff. But while you're a pen tester, you're always learning new stuff. So it's really good.
Thank you, Rory.
Thanks a lot, guys.